The Assembly Committee on Government Affairs will come to order. Mr. Secretary, please call roll.
Assemblywoman Anderson.
Present.
Assemblywoman Black.
Here.
Assemblywoman Brown May.
Here.
Assemblywoman Considine.
Present.
Assemblywoman Dickman.
Here.
Assemblywoman Duran.
Here.
Assemblyman Ellison.
Here, present.
Assemblywoman Martinez.
Present.
Assemblyman Matthews.
Here.
Assemblyman MacArthur.
Here.
Assemblywoman Thomas.
Here.
Assemblywoman Torres.
Here.
Chair Flores.
Present. Thank you. Let the record reflect all members are present. We have a quorum. Members, I want to remind you to please keep your microphone on mute unless you are speaking. Please keep your cameras on unless you have an emergency. You have to do something real quick. Just give me a heads up, please, if you're going to turn it off. I want to remind those of you who are going to be presenting this morning for you to please state your name for the record after each question. That's not for our purposes. That's to make the life of our staff easier. I want to remind those of you watching online and following along, thank you for being here with us this morning. Everybody has a very unique, different setup in their office, which is why you'll see people looking in different directions. That's just the way they have it structured in their own office. I want to remind folk who are wishing to speak in public comment that we're going to be saving that to the end of the meeting, and that we ask that you keep your comments to 2 minutes, please. With that, we're going to take the agenda in the order it appears. We have two bills for this morning. We have Assembly Bill 100 and Assembly Bill 139. And we'll start off with Assembly Bill 100. I'll open the hearing on Assembly Bill 100. Good morning. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair Flores. For the record, my name is Melanie Scheibel. I am the state senator from District 9 in Clark County, and I am here today to present Assembly Bill 100 for your consideration. With me today to present the bill are Casey, our state forester for fire warden with the Division of Forestry of the State Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, along with Barbara Richardson, the Commissioner of Insurance with the Division of Insurance of the Department of Business and Industry. Assembly Bill 100 was proposed by the committee to conduct an interim study concerning wildfires. It was my pleasure to serve as the vice chair of that committee during the 2019 to 2020 interim. As you may or may not know, the committee was created in 2019 by Assembly Concurrent Resolution 4. It was tasked with considering methods of reducing wildfire fuels, issues related to early responses to wildfires, and the economic impact of wildfires on the state and local communities. Former Assemblywoman Heidi Swank, chair of the committee, recommended AB 100, and the committee unanimously voted to request it. By way of background, there are hundreds of wildfires every year in Nevada, and in recent years, we experienced especially devastating wildfires. The 2018 Martin and Sugarloaf fires alone burned nearly 1 million acres of land in Northeast Nevada. Extremely dry conditions, caused in part by climate change, along with the spread of invasive plants like cheatgrass and an increased housing development in the wild-urban interface, have left the state particularly vulnerable to dangerous fire seasons. Because of Nevada's large proportion of public lands, several agencies share responsibility for wildfire prevention and suppression in the state. While it is often local governments that respond first to wildfire prevention and suppression is usually done in coordination with state and federal partners. The Division of Forestry provides fire protection and implements fire suppression and prevention programs, as well as related emergency services. Throughout the interim, the committee heard testimony and received written recommendations from the division regarding its various wildfire-related programs. Assembly Bill 100 is the result of those recommendations to codify in statute the division's Wildland Fire Protection Program, the Nevada Network of Fire Adapted Communities Program, and the Nevada Fire Board of Directors. Ms. Casey will provide you with details on how these programs help the division's mission in keeping us safe from wildfires. She will also explain the objectives and concept of a fire board of directors, which is a cooperative agreement with federal, state, and local agencies to improve our collaboration on all levels. The committee also heard testimony from the Division of Insurance on wildlife-related insurance issues. Specifically, we learned about the impact of wildfires on insurance rates, the difference in commercial versus personal insurance products, the lessons learned from the California Pacific gas and electric wildfire incident, and how livestock and grazing grounds are treated within a wildfire insurance policy. Therefore, AB 100 authorizes the Commissioner of Insurance to create an incentive program encouraging insurance-related incentives for Nevada homeowners who attain and maintain a fire-adapted community status. With the Chair's approval, I would like now to have Ms. Casey and Ms. Richardson provide more detailed background on the bill along with a section-by-section overview.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Casey, State Forester Fire Warden for the Nevada Division of Forestry. Thank you for having me here today. I will provide background for the sections being proposed in NDF statute NRS 472. Section 2 allows the State Forester Fire Warden to enter into cooperative agreements each year with state, federal, and local agencies to ensure communication and coordination on fire suppression assets and safe and effective wildfire response across all jurisdictions in Nevada. This is currently facilitated through the Nevada Fire Board of Directors. Section 2 would codify that participation in statute to ensure that coordination among federal, state, and local jurisdictions remains a top priority to ensure the closest available wildfire assets respond as quickly as possible via coordinated dispatch, are trained to the highest standards, and communicate in a timely and appropriate manner each season. Section 3 would establish Nevada's Wildland Fire Protection Program in statute. NDF has the authority to initiate these agreements with local fire jurisdictions under NRS 472050, and the division began building these agreements following legislative approval in the 77th session of the Nevada Legislature. Participating counties and fire protection districts in the interim committee requested that this program be specifically established in statute to provide program stability and longevity for participants. To maximize the value of the Wildland Fire Protection Program, it is important that all eligible jurisdictions become fully participants. Section 4 requires the state forester to work collaboratively with state, federal, and local agencies to identify and mitigate wildfire risks, restore and maintain landscape resiliency, create and maintain fire-adapted communities, and improve and support safe and effective wildfire response in Nevada. If Nevada is going to get ahead of the catastrophic loss of properties, lives, infrastructure, and ecosystems resulting from wildland fire.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I do know that some members are having a difficult time hearing you. If there's any possibility you can get slightly closer to the microphone, maybe that would help. I know it's uncomfortable because that means you get closer to the camera, but it may help with some of the members can't hear you at all. Thank you.
Okay, do you need me to go back or you want me to continue forward?
I think it's fine if you continue from where you stopped.
Okay, thank you. Again, for the record, Casey. I'll go back one sentence. If Nevada is going to get ahead of the catastrophic loss of property, lives, infrastructure, and ecosystems resulting from wildland fire, from all four areas must become the focus of work at a landscape scale to change fire behavior. This is consistent with NDF's primary strategic plan goals, the division's mission, and the shared stewardship agreement with our federal partners signed by Governor Sisolak in November of 2019. Section 5 allows the state forester fire warden to provide meals to employees on certain critical natural resource projects and wildland fire responses. This would not apply to all natural resource projects. This would apply only to projects that are so distant from an NDF office that an unreasonable amount of time is wasted each day in travel status, delaying work, and resulting in unnecessary per diem and overtime costs. Section 5 would allow NDF to camp on site and provide mobile kitchen units when deemed more economical for the project to provide meals. In addition to being more fiscally responsible, this proposal will increase the production rate of conservation crews and enhance staff safety, which otherwise greatly decreases because of drive times to and from projects. Section 5 also provides NDF mobile kitchen unit staff additional training that is necessary for them to provide meals during emergency responses. Section 6 requires the state forest or fire warden to cooperate with state, federal, and local agency cooperators on fire restrictions in Nevada. This is current practice. However, solidifying the practice in statute will ensure consistency into the future. Thank you for your consideration of AB 100 for Section 9. I will pass it over to Commissioner Richardson.
Thank you. Do we have our next speaker ready?
I was expecting Ms. Richardson today, and I thought I saw her earlier.
I know the connection's been a little faulty this morning, so it may be that she accidentally got kicked off. Senator, I don't know if you'd like to continue on to some questions on the sections we've already covered.
I think that'd be fine.
And or we can take a quick 1 minute recess so you can give her, reach out, give a quick call. Whatever you prefer.
Let's go ahead and take some questions.
Sounds good. Thank you, Senator. Members, I apologize with the connection this morning. Technology, it is what it is. We got to power through. With that said, I would like to open it up for questions with the understanding that we'll have somebody else joining us in a bit and continuing to cover some of the sections that were not touched yet. Members, who would like to start? If we could please start with Assemblyman Matthews.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator Scheibel, and thank you, Ms. Casey, for the presentation. I just had a quick question. Section 4, and I noticed that the operative word in the introduction says that the state forester fire warden shall, and then one of the things it includes is working collaboratively with various agencies and then property owners. And I'm just wondering if you might elaborate a little bit on that property owner facet of it. Presumably that's private property owners, but since the word shall suggests it's mandated, I'm just kind of wondering, are there specific property owners in mind, how that would work? What would kind of constitute fulfilling that mandate to work with private property owners, since that potentially could be a little bit broad or vague. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Assemblyman Matthews. For the record, again, Casey, State Forester Fire Warden for the Nevada Division of Forestry. We currently do work with private landowners. It is already in our statute. Part of our charge is to provide technical forestry and natural resource assistance to all landowners in the state who choose to participate. So this is just an extension of that. So if they choose, we aren't mandated to go out. However, under certain circumstances, we're looking to participate. So we might actually seek out homeowners who live in the wildland-urban interface who have high wildfire potential, working with our state and local partners to try to reduce risk in those communities. It doesn't mean that they are forced to participate. It means that we ask, and if they choose to participate in the programs that we might have, such as hazardous fuel reduction, forest health programs, we have urban and community forestry programs. We have a multitude of programs that can help assist landowners in trying to reduce risk on their property.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, may I be permitted a second question?
Please.
Thank you. Section 9, subsection 1, where it says that the commissioner may create a program for insurers to provide incentives. I'm just wondering, is there anything in place that sort of prevents insurers from perhaps providing those incentives already? I'm just trying to get an understanding of why a program may be needed, what the impediments may be to insurers sort of already providing such incentives on their own. Thank you.
Thank you. again, for the record, Casey, I think that probably would be a better question for the insurance commissioner on that section. That's not in my statutory area. I think, though, having participated in the program, one of the reasons behind this is there are other incentive programs for other natural disasters like earthquakes and floods. I think what the point of putting this into statute was to try to incentivize landowners to create and maintain defensible space. But that may be better answered by the insurance commissioner.
And
Thank you very much.
I do see our commissioners on, Assemblyman. Thank you, Commissioner, for joining us. I know there was you had reached out that you were going to be jumping on a few minutes late. We completely understand. If we could go back and allow for the presentation to flow as originally intended, Senator. I know the commissioner was going to cover a few sections, and that may help with Assemblyman Matthews' question, and then could also address preemptively some of the questions that we have from the other members. So, Commissioner, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. For the record, this is Barbara Richardson, Commissioner of Insurance, and thank you for allowing me to join you late. I apologize. We were doing our budget hearings, and that unfortunately that took precedence this morning. So I do want to thank Fire Warden Casey and make sure that she gets a lot of credit for going through this bill and doing the presentation. We've been working with the industry and with the Fire Warden's area for years, and it's great to be able to bring this type of bill forward. So basically, I'm going to focus specifically on Section 9, and it's going to allow the Commissioner of Insurance, in this case, our division, discretion to create an incentive program to quote, promote and encourage property owners to take measures to mitigate the risk of property loss or damage caused by wildfires. I want to make sure that to put on the record that the division had some concerns about this section of the bill. Not that we wanted to make any changes, but I want to put on the record that we believe that the bill focuses on individuals taking mitigation steps to help curb devastating effects of wildfire. However, the concerns that we have is that most of the time the efficacy of solely focusing on individuals doing mitigation isn't enough. So we're trying to make sure that on the record, we're going to say that we want to put forward the mitigating efforts taken by the whole community will likely be needed to have a statistically impactful decrease in the damage wildfire causes. So that does not require a change in the bill. It just, I just want to put on the record that that's where our focus would be. So while we stand neutral, and if you want to make changes, that's up to you all. I just wanted to make sure that the science doesn't support doing mitigation on a one-off basis. It's really a community effort. There are mitigation opportunities that some insurance carriers already take, but what we've seen, though, in the last few years, when there's been these large, devastating fires that have really wiped out large communities, there weren't enough incentives during the time period where the community could have taken action and put something forward. And so we don't really want to leave this solely in the hands of the insurance carriers. Not that they're already not doing a good job, but again, their concern is usually that a particular homeowner rather than the community as a whole. So that's what we're trying to sort of focus on. And there have been science that shows that community efforts work much better for all kinds of disasters and specifically fires. So this has been around for quite some time, and there's different programs that are being offered and sort of started throughout the country. So those are the kind of programs based on science and based on actual results that we'd be looking at. And I stand ready for any questions you may have.
And thank you again, Commissioner. I'd like to first give Assemblyman Matthews an opportunity to revisit the conversation he initiated. If you still have any concerns or questions regarding that section.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm good at this time. Appreciate it.
Perfect. With that, we'll go next to Assemblywoman Considine.
Thank you, Chairman. And my question is more towards Fire Warden Casey. In the initial part of the bill, it says that this will allow for the creation of a fire board of directors. And then in your testimony, you're saying that this is currently facilitated through the Nevada Fire Board of Directors. So is the board already created and is it already populated, is my question.
Thank you for the question, Assemblywoman. Again, for the record, Casey Casey, State Forester Fire Warden. Yeah, the board is already in place. The board currently consists of 9 or so members. It is the fire management officers of all the federal agents, land management agencies, the state us, NDF, and local government fire chiefs who are all jointly responsible for wildfire response in the state. The purpose of this was to continue that effort. Over history, that board has functioned at varying levels depending on who's the chair and who is in the seat and the priority they put to it. Our hope was to put this in statute to require that conversation. I think Commissioner Richardson made a very good point, and that was the point of putting all of these things kind of collectively together. It's not one of these things that's going to solve this problem that we have across in Nevada and across the West and into the rest of the United States. It's all of these parts that are going to come together to reduce risk. And so our job together, state and federal and local government land management agencies, is to create that safe halo around these communities, the communities to do their part to create fire resistant structures in landscapes, and then we will see changes in fire behavior. We will never not have fire in our landscapes. We're just hoping to affect how fire works in these landscapes.
Thank you. I appreciate that answer, and I'm glad to hear that the board's already full and functioning, and it's going to be put in statute. Thanks.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Next, I'd like to go to Assemblywoman Anderson.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation and also for being able to handle all of the fun and exciting Zoom video problems that we're all having. So thank you for that flexibility. My question is more for both Senator Scheibel and then also Ms. Casey. First of all, though, I also want to do a quick compliment coming from the north about how much emphasis there is with the Lake Tahoe Basin as well as the Lake Mead Basin. I greatly appreciate already the existing language and the attention to these natural forests and how difficult it can be sometimes with having to go across state lines and who's in charge and all that stuff. So I really appreciate that. But my question has more to do with Section 5, a little bit more clarification on what would be the critical natural resource projects that you would be speaking about, where somebody would need to stay after or stay home, where food would need to be provided based upon the location. Can you expand upon that phrase a little bit further?
Yes, thank you for the question again, Assemblywoman. For the record, Casey Casey, State Forester Fire Warden for NDF. I could give you a good example. We had a project where we collaborated with the Forest Service and local government and local homeowners in the Ruby Mountains. And the project was about a 2.5-hour drive one way to and from the project. So it was a critical project that we all identified as an area of high fire risk. And it was our goal to reduce that risk on about 4,000 acres of land for phases 1 and 2. Our crews were hired to do the work. Our crews are camped out of Wells in Carlin. That was the closest response that we had to this site. So, the primary cause of injury in our industry, both from a natural resource perspective and from a firefighting perspective, is actually travel to and from project or emergency response. So we're always looking for ways to reduce that. For this particular project, we had crews working a fire schedule. So we worked them about 16 hours a day, 5 of which was drive to and from. We had so that we could increase production on site. So we had costs for overtime and we had costs for meals needed to be provided. So we actually have 3 kitchens run out of our camp that do provide meals on smaller emergency response all across the state. If we had been able to take that kitchen up to this project, camp our crews on site, which we do for fire response anyway, we would have increased production, decreased the amount of time on the road, so it would have been much safer, and we would have actually gotten a lot more work done with less cost.
Thank you so much. I think that clarifies a large amount, and that work would be kind of the undergrowth removal, et cetera. Is that kind of those sort of projects that you're speaking about?
Thank you again for the question, Casey again for the record. Yes, that actual project was a thinning project, pinyon juniper removal, piling, and burning. So we were out there actually taking out some trees, some of the understory growth, and piling it for burning. They still are necessary for burn. Following that project, we did have a fire that came through and actually slowed in some of those areas and picked up where some of those piles had not yet been burned.
Thank you for the clarification, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
And thank you, Assemblywoman. Next, we have Assemblywoman Brown May.
Thank you for that great presentation. My question might be a little bit out of the language that you're looking to change, but I'm wondering if you can help to clarify. Section 6, it looks like sub 6. It says any person violating any of the provisions of subsection 1 is guilty of a misdemeanor. And at first I was just confused in that it only references subsection 1, but I'm thinking that it's referring us back to section 6. But then when I read 6 sub 1, it says the state forest fire warden may prohibit or restrict the following activities. So it says that the fire warden may prohibit the activities that are then listed, but then it says that the person violates any of those provisions is guilty of a misdemeanor. Is there a way to know whether or not the fire warden has restricted them? I was just a little bit of clarification there.
Thank you for the question, Assemblywoman. Again, for the record, Casey, State Forester Fire Warden. Yes, there is a way for everyone to know if we have gone into restrictions. I think that's the question. So if I don't answer it, please let me know. We post publicly all of our fire restrictions. So this is a collaborative effort, again, between state government, federal agencies, and our local government agencies. This year, we were successful in going in and out of restrictions together. Historically, we have gone separately, and it's very confusing for people who may or may not know whose land they're on and what the restrictions may be. So it was our goal this year to have restrictions that were at least very consistent across all of those land management partners. So my restrictions actually apply to all state lands in the state. And so we post them very publicly. We also send out a press release that says we've gone into fire restrictions. Once we terminate fire restrictions, we also post and publish that we have gone out of fire restrictions, and it's okay then to again have campfires in certain areas. State parks are allowed by our restrictions to further restrict if they feel in certain parts of the state. This year, kind of unprecedented, we went into full statewide restrictions. Usually we go into restrictions that are more localized, but because of the risk and the COVID-19 issues that we had with getting ground crews for firefighting, we all went into statewide restrictions. And so it was a lot easier, I think, for people to understand this year. So it's very well published. People know exactly what those restrictions are. They're published across all of our websites, and we do press releases to make sure it's very, very clear.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. I just wanted to make sure that there wasn't a follow-up there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That was a great answer. Thank you.
Great. Next, if we can go to Assemblywoman Thomas.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much for allowing me to ask this question. And I'm not sure who I'm directing this to. And first, I want to say that I thank you so much with the women that have been able to, the senator, commissioner, and the fire warden to present this bill, which is really important to the state of Nevada entirely. My question actually is in section 9, and it concerns the language, especially when we've seen in California where we've lost whole towns for, with fires, that we've been extremely fortunate that it hasn't happened to us in Nevada yet. So my question actually is, it says, it reads, the commissioner may create a program for insurers to provide incentives to promote and encourage property owners to take measures to mitigate the risk of property loss or damage caused by wildfire. The question is, why may? And then in subsection 2, it says, if the commissioner creates a program, again, those ambiguous words in there, can we make it stronger? And if you didn't make it stronger, why not?
So for the record, this is Barbara Richardson, the insurance commissioner, and I actually would leave that up to Ms. Scheibel to respond. I don't think it would make any difference to us at the insurance division if it was stronger, but there may have been some argument at some point from either the industry or as part of the creation of the bill. So I'll leave that to her.
Thank you, Melanie Scheibel, for the record. And are you referring specifically to section 9 or to the earlier portion of the bill?
No, ma'am. It's section 9, subsection 1 and 2. The ambiguous words of may and if.
I think that the intention was to allow for flexibility. I think that there's also always a fiscal concern, especially in the current economic climate. We didn't want to tie the hands of any agency that might not be able to afford to implement new regulations right now or develop new programs right now. But I don't think that it was not intended to signal to anybody that we don't want them to create this program or that they shouldn't create the program. It was just an effort to try to be to provide flexibility.
So is that, I'm sorry, Chair, follow up?
Please follow it.
So I just want to make sure that that's in agreement with the fire warden also, Ms. Casey.
Thank you, Assemblywoman, for the question. Casey, for the record. Yeah, I agree with that. It is our hope that we could create a program like that and incentivize. We have found that trying to mandate these types of things has not always been the best, most fruitful way of getting these things done. So providing incentives hopefully gives us a better way of doing it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Next, we have Assemblyman Ellison.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Checking with some people that was on that committee. I just have a couple of questions that I'd like to ask, if I may. And number one, the difference between the Nevada Forestry and BLM and the U.S. Forest Service, they got a lot of different guidelines as far as, like first responders. The ranchers are usually the first responders on the ground, that they allowed them finally to get on the fire before we get help there. The other thing was the grazing tactics. BLM and the counties use grazing tactics as much as they can for reduced wildland fires. And then the other thing is pruning. The BLM is doing a lot of pruning up in some of these areas, like in Eureka and Ely and up in them areas, to reduce wildland fires. But I know the Forest Service in some of their guidelines don't. And then there was a fine or a bill where NDF hit one county for over $1 million to do the jobs that they should have been helping to do to begin with. So can you answer any of these? And hope I didn't go too fast. But I remember that when they had the meeting with this on the Fire Safe Council, I was trying to follow as much as I could, by talking to people. So Could you answer some of them questions? And I appreciate it.
Thank you for the questions, Assemblyman. Again, for the record, Casey. I will hope to try to answer some of those questions. There are differences in the ways that we implement projects across agencies. The federal agencies obviously go through a NEPA process and some other processes, so they are held to the standards in which that public process has gone through. But we do work collaboratively on large landscape scale projects to try to ensure that we are kind of implementing the same kind of practices. We're always looking at current science to see what is most effective for fire mitigation or for sage grouse habitat or whatever it is that our resource objectives are for the project. So we are working together on that. Grazing is a tactic that all of us implement in different manners. Obviously, the federal agencies permit grazing on their land. The state doesn't have that necessarily, but we do use goats to try to reduce cheatgrass in areas. So we work together on those. The state was very successful in getting 5 pilot projects for looking at how the federal agencies permit grazing in these ecosystems. So, so there is coordination and collaboration, but we are kind of held to the standards of whatever the practice needs to be. I'm not sure what the $1 million bill was. I'm wondering if that's the Wildland Fire Protection Program and ELCO.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm really having a hard time. It's breaking up really, really bad, and I can't make out most of what's being said. I don't know if anybody else having that problem, and I don't want to be disrespectful. I just can't hear it. And I've got my speakers up to 90, so and it's breaking up real bad.
I don't know if it would be worth the effort. My team reached out and mentioned that maybe if we could have you quickly log out and then try to reconnect just to see if that provides some resolution here. That'd be helpful. We could go into one minute recess while we allow Ms. Casey to do that. 1 minute recess.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You all hear me better?
Unfortunately, it sounds very similar. However, Ms. Casey, if I could just have you do a quick 1, 2, 3 to see if it sounds better on our end.
1, 2, 3.
I have a question in the broadcast. Is there a way for them to just switch to phone audio so she could call in? Because I know that it appears on my end. Next, if you just click the little arrow and then switch to phone audio, I'm not sure if that would be sufficient and allow for a more clear connection since it would be based off phone and not internet. I don't know, broadcast.
Hi, yes, Chair Torres, Vice Chair Torres, this is an option. Would you like to call in instead, Ms. Casey?
I'm happy to do that. What number would I call into?
I will throw it in the chat. Give me 1 second.
Thank you for your flexibility, Ms. Casey. I just want to make sure that everybody's getting the full account of your testimony and the knowledge you're bringing to this bill. So thank you for working with us.
Yes, no problem. I apologize. I can hear it On my end too, when I'm speaking, I can hear feedback, but I don't know what that's coming from.
Yeah, sometimes I've had it where it'll kick me off and, it's just,
Chair, we are ready.
I'll call the meeting back to order. Thank you for those of you following along virtually. Members, thank you for your patience as we work through those tech issues that tend to occur during this age. With that, Ms. Casey, we'll go back to you. Ms. Casey is now on the phone. And Ms. Casey, if you could, in a succinct manner, and I know that's difficult because you've had a lot of questions, but maybe go back a question or two and respond to the members' questions so that I want to make sure everybody had an opportunity to get that on the record and that it was clear what your response was.
Thank you, Chair. Again, to Assemblyman Ellison's question, I'm Casey for the record. Just to answer the question, there are differences between sometimes how we implement projects across different landscapes. The BLM and the Forest Service go through a public NEPA process, so their process is dictated by what comes the results of this public process. However, we are always looking at the best available science. We're always working together to see what treatments are going to have the best impacts. And if the BLM is implementing a way and we can implement that way on direct adjacency, we are working together through those processes. I spoke to grazing tactics. The federal agencies are the ones who allow or permit for grazing on their lands, but they do a lot of that, and Nevada was successful in getting 5 pilot projects across the state at looking at how we permit those and trying to create more flexibility in the permitting, as a lot of the processes of the past actually were hindering us in meeting resource objectives on the ground. And so by being a forward-thinking state who actually has been working together for quite some time, we got 5 pilot projects where other states in the West only got 1. And I think they've had great success in that program. And then from a pruning perspective, we are working together. We're always looking at the same sciences. The piece I was unsure of how to answer is the $1 million bill piece. And I'm wondering, Assemblyman Ellison, if that was related to the Wildland Fire Protection Program and Elko County.
Yes, it was. And I know it was over $1 million. And I just was handed the casualty property insurance and the state of Nevada, letter from the state of Nevada with the concerns on Section 9, which I had the same concerns. And so the other colleagues that spoke also on Section 9. Was there any way to amend this for protection to these small counties?
Thank you again. For the record, Casey, State Forester Fire Warden. I will speak to the WFPP portion. When the Wildland Fire Protection Program began, we did not have a formula that could be given to participants. So as you guys may or may not be aware, we began the program in state fiscal year 14. The science behind how they spread the costs was based on professional knowledge of risk and cost. However, we have since created a formula that was done in the last session that actually does look at the cost to the state for these fires. So we take out everything that we get reimbursed through cost share, through our federal partners, through FEMA grants, all of those things. And it's only the cost on behalf of the participating jurisdiction that the state is actually expending on their behalf, in addition to the risk that is on their state, private, and county lands only. Only those areas that those jurisdictions have jurisdiction over. So we did come up with we had a panel of local government fire chiefs. We included the Elko County Fire Chief in the creation of this formula. Though they didn't love the formula outputs, we had no better way to actually assess risk. And so the problem, and I think I said this in the past, was for Elko. Elko is a large county in Nevada. They have a lot of private land ownership as they're checkerboarded more than other counties, and they have high fire activity and high fire risk. So that all goes against them in this formula. So they did go from, I think, about 500 or 600,000 of buy-in to a little over $1 million. However, we have all of the backup documentation for the past almost 9 years to show that the state, on behalf of the jurisdiction, has paid well above that every year for wildfire costs. And so we provide that to them every year. They have and as you may recall last session, we were asked, because of the steady increase, to break them in slowly. So they are not currently paying that price. We actually contracted at a lower rate. So we are currently rerunning the formula right now with 3 more years of exact costs, and we will start negotiating the contracts for this coming July 1st in the next couple weeks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Next, if we can go to Madam Vice Chair, I don't know if you had a question. I know you previously had the recommendation of switching over to the phone, but I don't know if you also had a question.
No, thank you, Chair.
Okay. If I can go to Assemblywoman Anderson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really appreciate that little bit of a break, because actually it gave me an opportunity to double check one more piece of information. Is there a reason why general improvement districts or incorporated cities are not included in this the interface, like the discussions, or is there a plan to maybe include them in other ways?
Thank you for the question, Assemblywoman. Again, for the record, Casey. They are incorporated. It depends on how the county has been formed as a fire district. Some are formed they're formed differently under 477, NRS 477. So if the county is responsible, then the county is the participant in the Wildland Fire Protection Program as a whole, covering the entire county and all that's within. So we did it based on how they were formed and at their request. So originally we had looked at Clark County as an entire entity. And they asked us to break that up into participating entities. So it's however they were formed. So some, as you will see, are actual counties as participants. Some are cities or fire protection districts, as you will. So it was just based on the formation.
Thank you. Follow up, Mr. Chair, if I may.
Follow up, please.
Thank you. So although it's not necessarily set out in NRS or in this proposed language, a group could, in fact, that is maybe not currently being specified, can actually ask to be part of this. Is that, am I understanding that correctly?
Thank you for the question. Again, for the record, Casey. They could ask, the group would have to have fire jurisdictional responsibility for the lands that are within that particular area. So yes, they could ask, and we have looked at other entities, but most of the fire protection districts, counties, or whatever fire entities cover almost all the state with protection. And we, again, exclude the federal land management agencies as they have their own process.
Thank you so much for that clarification. And thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I don't believe we have any other questions. However, Ms. Casey, I will ask, and I hate to task you with this homework, but for the sake of clarity and so that I know that all the members have an opportunity to have their questions addressed and that they have the opportunity to hear you thoroughly. If you could provide our committee manager, Ms. Judy Bishop, with an email just with those clarifying points that you made previously, and then we'll disperse those amongst the members. And that way everybody will have your responses previously indicated. And again, you can do it in a much more succinct manner. No need to do that now. I do see that Assemblywoman Black has an additional question. Please, Assemblywoman Black.
I was curious, firstly, it says the fire warden shall cooperate with federal, state, and local agencies in restricting a broad base of activities if there's a risk of fire. I'm wondering why you would choose to make that a shall versus a may.
Thank you for the question, Assemblywoman Black. Again, for the record, Casey. The reason we would choose to put it as a shall is, as I kind of stated earlier, it's confusing in the state of Nevada because of land ownership patterns. where you might be recreating and on whose land you might be, given that we have a lot of wide open spaces. Some of it's public, some of it's private. So it is our goal to work together to try to implement fire restrictions together. There are times when we cannot come up with the same answer, and so the BLM may enforce different restrictions than the state, and that's okay. We do that at time too. But the shall is that we shall at least coordinate together, so that if there are differences that we put out, we can at least speak to that difference to the public so that there isn't any confusion. Our goal is to try to reduce confusion for those who are recreating in the state.
That makes sense. Thank you. Chair, can I follow up or ask a
Please follow. Please do.
Okay. My second question, it's around the program to incentivize people. So it says you may create a program that incentivizes to promote and encourage property owners to take measures, yada, yada, yada. It doesn't define what those incentives are. Can you give a couple of examples or tell me why you didn't, or why there isn't not specifically laid out here?
So this is Barbara Richardson for the record. Thank you, Assemblywoman. So one of the reasons it's not specifically laid out here is that it depends on the area that you're within. For example, we were talking about Elko or the Great Plains versus the Tahoe Basin. The different there might be different incentives based on the fire lines or the type of property that the fire protections are trying to take into account. So if there's not a one size fits all that covers everything. So we're trying really hard to use the science of the area, the science that we've been able to pick up working with the fire wardens and just economists and fire specialists and natural disaster specialists who put out predictive models. So all of those bits and pieces are put together. And as far as incentives go, what we're hoping to do is work with the insurance carriers, because what insurance carriers find is that they'll go along and they'll be fine in a particular area, and we push to make sure there's coverage, but there is not a lot of protection then for the insurance carrier if there's a fire in that space as well. So the consumer's harmed and the carrier's harmed because they have to take on a large risk all in one shot. So what we're trying to do is figure out ways to balance that so that there's more insurance opportunities for more consumers. So it's going to be different in different areas based, again, on the fire risk.
Perfect. Members, any additional questions, feel free to unmute yourself and state your name. Seeing none at this time, again, Ms. Casey, I would appreciate if you could help us with that homework I assigned, and that's not intentional. It's just, I think it'd be very helpful to clarify any lingering questions that are still there. At this time, I'd like to go to those wishing to testify in support. My understanding is we have Mr. Thompson here on video wishing to speak in support. If we can go to you first.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the opportunity. Steve Thompson, President of the Clark County Firefighters, for the record. I'm here to support AB 139. I'm not for sure if this is the exact meeting or if we were in the other one still.
Understood. Did you indicate AB 139?
Yes, sir.
Okay. If we could please have you sit tight. We're going to continue with Assembly Bill 100 at this time.
Perfect. Thank you. I apologize for the misunderstanding.
No worries. No worries. So again, if there's anybody who's on video wishing to testify in support of Assembly Bill 100, if you could please unmute yourself now and state your name for the record. I believe only Mr. Thompson is who we had on video for that. With that broadcast, if we could please go to those wishing to testify in support of Assembly Bill 100, if we go to the phone lines.
To testify in support of Assembly Bill 100, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. caller with the last 3 digits of 732, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hello, my name is Kyle Davis. That's Kyle Davis, and I'm here today on behalf of the Nevada Conservation League. We are here today in support of AB 100. We appreciate the bill sponsors for bringing it forward. The environmental impacts of large-scale wildfires are pretty clear at this point, and the devastation that it does to native ecosystems, to our wildlife and plant populations is clear. And so this bill, we think, offers an opportunity both to better prevent wildfires in the first place, and certainly if they do happen, to be able to better fight those and keep them from becoming as devastating as we have seen in recent years. So for those reasons, we are in support of the bill. Appreciate the time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And thank you. If we could please go to the next caller wishing to testify in support of Assembly Bill 100.
Chair, there are no more callers in support at this time.
Perfect. At this time, I'd like to invite those wishing to speak in opposition of Assembly Bill 100. If we could please go to the phone lines.
To testify in opposition to Assembly Bill 100, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no more callers in opposition at this time.
Great. And if we could please go next to those wishing to speak in the neutral position for Assembly Bill 100.
To testify in neutral on Assembly Bill 100, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers in neutral at this time.
Thank you. I know our senator had a conflicting schedule at 10 a.m. and had to sneak out. Ms. Casey, if we could come back to you with any closing remarks you may have.
Thank you. Again, for the record, Casey. I don't have any closing remarks. I just appreciate the opportunity to speak for, well, hopefully that you heard a little bit of it today. I will provide what you've asked for. I will look at what was asked and then provide that backup. Thank you for having me here today.
And thank you. With that, I'd like to close out the hearing on Assembly Bill 100. And we do have our chairman here, Assemblyman Yeager, who's going to be presenting Assembly Bill 139, or better said, co-presenting. At this time, I'd like to open up the hearing on Assembly Bill 139.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. May I proceed with the presentation?
Please do.
Thank you. So, good morning, Mr. Chair, Chair Flores, Vice Chair Torres, and members of the Assembly Government Affairs Committee. My name is Steve Yeager. I represent Assembly District 9, which is located in Southwest Las Vegas. It is my pleasure to be presenting Assembly Bill 139 to you this morning, and it is a pleasure to appear in front of this committee for the first time this session. Mr. Chair, with your permission, what I would like to do is make some brief introductory remarks, and then I'll hand it over to a few experts who are on the Zoom with us today. Those experts include Nat Hodgson from the Southern Nevada Home Builders, who will give a brief history of the bill. Then Mr. Todd Inglesby with the Professional Firefighters of Nevada to discuss what the bill will mean for the public and his members. And then after that, Mr. Matt Walker, also on behalf of the Southern Nevada Home Builders, will do a brief rundown of the bill itself, and then we can take questions. Does that work for you, Mr. Chair?
Sounds perfect, Assemblyman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Steve Yeager for the record. Every once in a while, you get to work on legislation in this building that tangibly and directly impacts your assembly district. Assembly Bill 139 is one of those bills, and I feel very fortunate that the proponents brought this to me and asked me to sponsor it. You will also note that Assemblywoman Gorlow is a co-sponsor, as well as Senator Scheibel. Assemblywoman Gorlow and I are nestled in Senator Scheibel's Senate district, which is also in Southwest Las Vegas. We are all excited about what this bill could mean for Southwest Las Vegas. As many of you know, growth in the Southwest in Clark County has been tremendous over the past few years. The district hardly resembles the district that I first ran in back in 2014. As a result of that explosive growth, infrastructure has yet to catch up, including fire stations. Just a couple of weeks prior to session, an unoccupied apartment complex about a mile from my house caught fire. The flames could be seen from miles away, and the firefighters fought valiantly through the night before containing the fire, and thankfully nobody was harmed or injured. What this bill is going to do functionally is allow additional fire stations to be built to service the southwest part of Las Vegas, ensuring adequate response times to emergency situations, thereby improving public safety and the safety of the community. Mr. Chair, that concludes my remarks, and with your permission, I would like to hand it over to Mr. Hodgson to talk a little bit more about the history of the bill.
Sounds perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Yeager. Chairman Flores and members of the committee, my name is Nat Hodgson, Hodgson. I am the CEO of the Southern Nevada Home Builders Association. About 20 years ago, SNHBA was a part of a working group to identify funding sources in the Southwest Valley to fund public infrastructures, including parks, public safety, transportation, and resulted in the implementation of a PF&A fee for fire service. After the Great Recession, the fees never caught up with the inflation, and the county and industry were met and are met with a significant gap in funding this critical infrastructure. 2019, under Chair Kirkpatrick and Commissioner Jones's leadership, a group of stakeholders got together to support indexing to the PF&A and 100% increase, but those dollars still cannot meet the need for the gap that's existing today. The bill before you today is a result over a year of working towards creative solutions to meet the need. The issue lies with the existing gap and needing 2 fire stations very, very soon. As you will see in a PowerPoint presentation, all developer fees for permits and plans are paid into the Building Enterprise Fund. An advisory committee of county staff and industry representatives oversee the fund. As custodians of these funds and as an industry member who is committed to funding target service levels, a healthy balance of these funds is critically important to me. I, or a member of my staff, currently sit on the advisory committees of Clark County, City of Henderson, and the City of Las Vegas. I've served on the county's Building Enterprise Fund Advisory Committee for about 8 years, and I still currently serve on it as well. The PowerPoint has provided you a map of the targeted fire service levels in unincorporated Clark County. We wanted the committee to hear from an expert, so Todd Engelpies, president of the Professional Firefighters of Nevada, will now talk through the service level maps and provide additional comments on what service levels mean for members of the public and his membership. Afterwards, Mr. Matt Walker will go through section by section amendment. Thank you.
Welcome, Mr. Walker.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and committee members. My name is Todd Engelby. I'm the president of the Professional Firefighters Nevada. I hope you are doing well and staying safe. As you have heard from the other presenters, Nevada has grown and continues to grow. It is vital we have an infrastructure in place to be able to provide essential safety services. As you can see in the heat maps, we are behind in the Southwest Valley and Southern Nevada, but this is an issue for the entire state. We are here asking for your help for this bill. This bill will help current and future residents, along with the millions of visitors we hope to have back in our state soon. The lack of fire stations and personnel creates a safety concern when we are not able to meet the minimum standard of a 4-minute response. What that means is when you call 911 in an emergency, we should have fire personnel to your location within 4 minutes. If your mom, dad, brother, sister, son, or daughter is having a heart attack or drowning, 4 minutes is a long time. Imagine if it was 6, 8, 10 minutes before you have fire department personnel at your door starting to initiate care. I'm not sure if any of you have ever called 911, but 4 minutes can seem like an eternity. Everything we do as a fire department is based on getting to the emergency as fast as possible to get the best outcome. We are taught very early in our career to treat every person as if they are family. When considering this bill, I would ask the committee to do the same. If your family member was having a heart attack, your son or daughter was drowning, or your house was on fire, what would you want for them, a 4-minute response or 10-minute response. The state continues to see massive growth, especially with our large master plan communities, just like in the Southwest, in the Northwest of Las Vegas as well, in the Reno area. People are buying dream homes, and they do research when they're buying those dream homes of schools, proximity to work, grocery stores, but what is often forgotten is where is the closest fire station. Most people assume that the city or county is ensuring that all homes are only built if the basic safety infrastructure is in place. Unfortunately, that is not the case. If the closest fire station is 10 minutes away with lights and sirens, that can be detrimental to a person's health, their safety, their home. That also assumes that when they call 911, the closest station isn't already on a call. We wish we could be to every call within 4 minutes, but anything over 4 minutes is unacceptable. Thank you again for your time and consideration on this bill. And hopefully this bill, if passed, it will save lives. Thank you for your time. If you have any questions, I'll remain on. I'm going to pass over to Matt Walker now to go over the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. And now welcome, Mr. Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, committee members. Matt Walker on behalf of the Southern Nevada Home Builders Association. I'm going to do a brief section by section just to orient the committee to what I'm going through. I am presenting the bill as amended by the amendment that was also submitted for Nellis for folks that are following along. So section 1, subsection 1A makes it clear that this bill is targeting money in building enterprise fund reserves that are over and above the statutory cap set by NRS 354-59891. Section 1, subsection 1B states that the local government must have adopted the findings of a public facilities needs assessment pursuant to NRS 278.02591 within the date specified that identify the need for additional fire stations. Section 1, subsection 2 makes it clear that funds transferred for this purpose are exempt from the cap in NRS 354.59891. In recognition that this is a temporary authority granted to local governments with the intent that they act quickly to address the identified need for fire stations, Section 1, subsection 3 sets timelines for the transfer of funds and the return of all unused funds. If the committee adopts the proposed amendment developed in coordination with Clark County, local governments would have until June 30th, 2022 to transfer eligible funds and must return all unspent funds by January 1st, 2025. Lastly, Section 5, subsection 2 sets an expiration date for this temporary enabling statute. The proposed amendment proposes to change the sunset date to June 30th, 2025, again, in the spirit of giving local governments the time that they need to complete the construction and return those funds. In closing, I would like to thank Assembly Members Yeager, Gorlow, and Senator Scheibel for helping lead this important public safety conversation by sponsoring AB 139. I'd like to thank the Nevada Resort Association, MGM, Red Rock Resorts, NAIOP, and all the very important enterprise fund stakeholders that allowed this conversation to progress forward. I would like to thank Commissioner Kirkpatrick and Jones, Clark County Building Official Jerry Stevie for their leadership and open communication on this proposal. I think that this bill is a real credit to the Southern Nevada development industry and elected representatives from this area that when presented with a challenge that was compounded by the crisis that we're seeing in the budgets of local governments due to COVID, they invited folks to the table and were willing to step up and identify an outside of the box solution. And we're very pleased to be presenting it to your committee this morning, Mr. Chair. And with that, I'll conclude and stand ready for questions.
And thank you. I appreciate the thoroughness of the presentation and the amount of folk we have on here. I know we have a lot of bright minds here that can walk us through any questions we may have. At this time, I'd like to open it up for questions, and we'll start off with Assemblyman Matthews.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Thanks to all of our presenters on this bill. I just had a question regarding a comment that was made, and I apologize for, I forget which of our presenters made it, but it kind of talked about the need for this bill in the context of rapid growth in the Southwest and infrastructure, not being sufficient, to keep up with that. And I guess the question would be, and it sort of gets to the slippery slope issue, I guess. Are you aware of any other infrastructure shortcomings in the Southwest that you think might cause you to sort of come back and seek additional, transfers from the enterprise fund in the future? I'm just wondering if you foresee this. I know that the bill is limited to fire stations, but I'm just wondering if you anticipate this as a potential first step toward additional such measures, if there are other infrastructural needs that you identify in that part of the valley. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I'll step in and start the response to that question. With many of the questions that I anticipate from this committee, the caveat is going to be Clark County will certainly speak for themselves when it comes to their need, their budgeting process, and the timing of transfers, et cetera. But public facilities needs assessment are a powerful tool of local government to ensure that growth and demand on infrastructure driven by growth across a wide spectrum of categories is addressed. We encourage local governments to have those conversations and revisit them on a regular basis so that we don't fall into the situation similar to the one we're seeing now with fire station funding. I would say that it is a rapidly growing area with a wide variety of needs, and we're always at the table with the county and other stakeholders in local government across the valley that are seeing similar growth patterns to ensure that we're meeting those needs. As part of every community, we're obviously planning for fire hydrants, water pressure, and many other infrastructure items related to firefighting capacity. This just happens to be one where I feel like we fell short when it came to future planning on the actual physical location of fire stations themselves.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Assemblyman. I think it would be helpful for the members that we understand where the genesis of this fund started, where the conversation started, where this money's coming from. I don't necessarily think that the members have a full grasp on that. If we can go all the way back, understand why we have this fund, where we're collecting this money from, who's paying into that, and then if we can come back to the bill, just so that we're all on the same page.
Mr. Chair, Matt Walker for the record. I'll again start the response here, and we'll hope that presenters chime in if I miss anything. But enterprise funds under NRS 354 are something that local governments can set up. Barricade permits, plan fees, and building permits. Those revenues accrue within that enterprise fund. Local governments that have this specialized fund use these funds to fund two key components. One is staff, the folks that can provide the service levels that industry needs in order to continue growth in a thriving economic environment. The second purpose of those enterprise funds is for any capital needs associated with the building, the processing of building permits. So the actual building itself, the computer equipment, and other physical needs associated with the building department are all provided for by the enterprise fund in jurisdictions that have set up an enterprise fund for this purpose. So, Mr. Chairman, statute is very clear that this money goes in and can only be used for those purposes expressed in NRS 354. Lastly, I'll conclude by saying that another key component for today's discussion is that NRS 354 limits how much can be held in reserve for these building enterprise funds. So local government cannot exceed more than 50% of the annual operational needs of the building department, plus any capital expenditures for 2 consecutive years. So typically when you have an overly healthy fund reserve, you burn the additional funds off by increasing the amount of capital improvement projects or lowering permit fees to ensure that you don't hit that second year over and above the cap. We happen to be in that fortunate circumstance in Clark County with a very healthy enterprise fund reserve, and we simply think that it's a better use of the money than burning it off with additional capital improvement projects at the building department or lowering permit fees in a future year. We think that it's the highest and best use to get these funds over to start construction of fire stations as soon as possible.
Thank you. If we could go next to Assemblywoman Black.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, everyone, for the presentation. I'm familiar with the fire station problem, the ambulance problem. I was on City Council in Mesquite, and we have this exact problem with a fire station right next door to City Hall and trying to figure out how to upgrade and renovate it. My concern, I have a couple. One is, if there's so much excess money in these enterprise funds, is it possible that maybe we're charging too high of a fee? I mean, that's more a rhetorical question, but that's something that's popping up in my mind as we're talking about this. But it's my understanding, as Mr. Walker described, that these enterprise funds are set aside to help run these departments. What happens if we've been very fortunate, the housing markets continue to go, developments continue to go. What happens if we don't see that continue? Like if there's a downturn, what happens in these departments if they don't have money to continue to go forward? Do they have to be paid for out of the general fund?
Matt Walker for the record, on behalf of the Southern Nevada Home Builders Association. Again, I will defer on the portion referring to what would local governments do in the case of a shortfall in the enterprise fund. For clarity's sake, I think it's really important for them to make the record on that issue. But I will say that a healthy fund and the service levels associated with the healthy fund are critically important to the Southern Nevada home builders and other members of the development community. That's why they sit on those building enterprise fund advisory committees and meet on a regular basis to monitor the health of those funds. I think that it's fair to say that largely the excess of fund reserves in Clark County is due to several large projects kind of creating a bubble and increased revenue that kind of moved its way through the chain, as you can think of some large projects that have been completed in unincorporated Clark County recently. And I think that over and above anything else, a change in staffing level, change in capital expenditures, change in the levels of your typical development activity with smaller shopping centers and homes have all stayed pretty constant. And so I think that it's fair to say the fund balance is reflective of some really large projects working their way through the pipeline.
Assemblywoman Black, I don't know if you had a follow-up.
Well, I guess he was going to defer to somebody else to answer what the municipalities would do if there was a downturn. But I guess I do have a follow-up question for Mr. Walker. Clark County already collects a public facility needs assessment fee. Does that fee include fire stations?
Yeah, thank you, Matt Walker, again, for the Southern Nevada Home Builders Association. Thank you for the question, Assemblywoman Black. I think it's important to highlight that there is a public facilities needs assessment fee for the Southwest area, as Mr. Hodgson highlighted briefly in his testimony. It's been in place for about 20 years now. What happened is that they were put in place in the early 2000s, pre-Great Recession, and the area really exploded in growth post-Great Recession, and those fees had never been indexed or otherwise adjusted to reflect the higher construction costs that we see today. And so the home builders came to the table along with other development community partners, increased that fee by 100% and index the cap in the fee going forward. So we hope to never be in this position again in the Southwest along the lines of where we're at today with a gap in fire service infrastructure funding. So the short answer is that this bill would fill that gap, but we've already taken steps in coordination with Commissioner Jones and Commissioner Kirkpatrick and staff to ensure that we never end up in this spot again.
Mr. Chair, I have a follow-up if that's okay.
Is it for Mr. Walker, or what
Well,
we
I'm
could
still-
do, Assemblywoman, go to Clark County and get their intent on the record. But let's do this. We'll remain with the questions for Mr. Walker, and then afterwards we'll go to Clark County. Please ask, Assemblywoman.
I guess I don't know who this would be for, but it's my understanding right now that as it stands, enterprise funds can loan money. Why not? My first question is, what do we do in the case of a downturn? My second question is, why not loan the money and then repay it? That way we're not raiding these funds.
Matt Walker, for the record, on behalf of the Southern Nevada Home Builders Association. Another great question, Assemblywoman Black. I would say that Clark County can probably touch on this issue as well, but essentially, because statute would not allow them to hang on to this money, it would have to be returned or burned off in other types of capital improvement expenditures. There simply wouldn't be the ability for them to loan the money over, because they would not be able to retain it for that second year, which it exceeded the statutory cap in 354. So a transfer really is appropriate in this circumstance. And because the need is driven by development, we feel like, although important that it's a temporary and one-time authorization, it is an appropriate use of those funds.
Thank you. And if we could go to Clark County. I think the sentiment of the first set of questions we've gone is specifically in this committee, we've heard the word sunset used all too often, and there is a concern that we consistently keep moving the goalpost, and we set these sunsets and simply come back every session and keep setting new sunsets, and it becomes this perpetual cycle. I think that was one of the concerns that was brought up. The second was when we originally talked about this enterprise fund and the buy-in from folk was with one expectation, and now we're talking about potentially utilizing it in a different way, with the caveat and understanding that we need these things. Obviously, we need fire, but if you could just get into that, and Clark County, if you could kind of set the record straight on the intent, desire, what we're going to be doing in the future, so that we can leave a paper trail on what the intent is now. And should we have a conversation similar to this in 2 years or 4, the members have an opportunity to come back and say, look, we had a very candid conversation about this, and it was put on the record. It was very clear what the intent was then, why we were doing that at that time. And here was a commitment that we weren't going to continue this cycle where we just have fees going, escaping where we originally started this conversation on these funds.
Sure, Chairman Flores, this is Joanna Jacob, Government Affairs Manager for Clark County. I apologize for my appearance. I wasn't expected to be on the Zoom. I'm working from home today, so I can speak. I think that the concerns were adequately addressed by Mr. Walker. He has explained that I think part of the reason why we do have such a health and viability of this fund right now is because of large projects that he has identified. The reserve requirement that is in statute is there for a reason, because the building department at Clark County is an enterprise fund, so that they are self-supporting in that sense. Assemblywoman Black, I'm trying to get an answer for you on what would happen. I'm not sure, and I apologize. I was trying to get an answer for you before I was called upon to see if we would have to, what we would have to do if that, if the economy turns around and if those projects don't continue, then I think there would be a concern on this. We would have to reassess, because the point of that reserve is that so we don't have to reduce services, and that the department is self-supporting. I think, Mr. Chairman, if I may, the conversations that were ongoing during the interim and when we were in this cycle were whether we did, as Mr. Walker noted, have to reduce fees. That is one of the statutory requirements for this type of fund. And we've really taken a look, as he noted, on a needs assessment and on a gap funding. And that's really where the genesis of these conversations came. And because it is limited to fire at this time. That is the biggest. I know Mr. Inglesby, I thought, summarized that very well, that is our biggest community need at this time that we feel that was identified. That public facilities needs assessment was directed by our board. I want to make everybody aware that our board does not want to kick the can down the road on the need for public safety on a county-wide basis. And so they are ongoing, monitoring this on an ongoing, in an ongoing fashion. But the reason why you see the sunset, Mr. Chairman, is because as you know, we're watching this and seeing if conditions change, then we would maybe, that's why we wanted to put a sunset on it, because we do have the fund in a healthy place right now, and we feel that we could divert some of the funding there to meet our fire station needs.
Mr. Chairman, if it would be okay, could I add to that response very, very briefly?
Please do.
So I didn't want to step on toes, so thank you for the second opportunity to answer this question, but I am aware of a circumstance in, for instance, City of Henderson during the Great Recession, where the general fund did come in and supplement staff levels in the Building Enterprise Fund, and then the Building Enterprise Fund paid back the general fund as it emerged from, as permit revenue emerged from the depths of the Great Recession. So that certainly is the mechanism that I'm historically aware of, and I imagine that local governments would take a similar approach should the pandemic lead to similar circumstances.
Thank you for that. And that was that was Mr. Walker for the record. If we could please go back to Assemblywoman Black.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I hate to harp on this. I know that Ms. Jacobs said that they're contemplating a reduction in the fee. I think that that's really, if this is a problem that we're going to have more than the amount of money that's allowed to carry over in these funds, I think that it's really important that we lower those fees. And as you said, the need is in fire right now, but I can tell you there's always going to be a need where you'll solve this need and then something else will come up. So as long as there's an excess amount of money in this fund, which there should not be, then there will always be something to spend it on. And that's my concern. Thank you.
If we could next go to Assemblywoman Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have two questions. The first one, I believe, is for Mr. Inglesby, and then, or maybe for Mr. Walker too. I just wanted to verify that although right now the line of questioning has been concentrating on in Clark County, this is for any city or county government that has a building enterprise fund. Is that correct?
Matt Walker, for the record, on behalf of the Southern Nevada Home Builders Association, thank you for the opportunity to provide that clarification, Assemblywoman Anderson. So this is for any local government that has a building enterprise fund, has funds that are in excess of the reserve amounts identified in the bill, and have conducted a public facilities needs assessment pursuant to 278.02591. So if you've had, for members who've had a chance to peruse that chapter and kind of refresh their memory on the structure, that is in the section associated with regional planning for counties whose population is 700,000 or more.
Thank you for that clarification. Just wanted to make sure that I was reading that information correctly. And then my second question, I believe, is more directed towards Chair Yeager, Assembly Member Yeager, excuse me. Is there any sort of, or anybody actually, has there been any sort of discussion about possibly changing or even adjusting section 1, I believe it's anyways, where it would also be an ability to utilize these funds for retrofitting already existing buildings, or is it only for the creation of and the building of new stations?
This is Steve Yeager for the record. Thank you for that question. And I'll probably hand it over to Mr. Walker, but I think this just contemplated the building of new stations, at least as the bill is presented to you. But Mr. Walker has been a little more intimately involved in some of those conversations. So, Mr. Chair, if you'll allow, maybe he can explain if that was a topic of discussion for now or later.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Matt Walker, on behalf of the Southern Nevada Home Builders Association. For the record, I have had a discussion with Mr. Inglesby and other PFFN stakeholders that suggested that, similar to other impact fees, similar to the residential construction tax use that's collected in a similar manner, that infrastructure generally driven by the need for new development may be inappropriate use of these transferred funds. And we will engage with the bill sponsor after today's hearing to see if there's a concept we can land on. But as Mr. Yeager, as Assemblyman Yeager indicated, this really is to solve a pretty specific set of circumstances. And I think that certainly the engagement and problem solving conversations that have been had on this bill have been really centered around the Clark County context and this particular set of circumstances.
Thank you for that clarification. And thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Assemblyman Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, I'd like to open up with a couple of questions. Mr. Hodson stated in his testimony when he opened up about the building fund. And may I ask him some questions?
Please.
Yeah. How many counties that actually have a building fund, that would fall under this? 'Cause I don't know of very many counties that might have this. And if it did, wouldn't some of that money help go to do like street lightings and stoplights and some of these new subdivisions that are out there that has put too much burden on them? Could you answer that? And then I've got others, because I know our enterprise funds do wastewater, landfills, water, airports, this kind of stuff. And I know that our building permits go up to help pay for some of these other things, which goes back into the county or the cities. So could you tell me how many buildings funds out there that collect this fund?
Nat Hodgson, for the record, with Southern Nevada Home Builders Association. I don't know 100% of particulars. I believe the way the bill is written, the enterprise fund that would be applicable to would be only Clark County. I know that as far as enterprise funds go in Southern Nevada, I'm only aware of 3 municipalities that have an enterprise fund. That's Henderson, Clark County, and City of Las Vegas. And it is to pay for just services for building. As Mr. Walker indicated, capital improvements to the building, which houses the employees that the enterprise fund pays for.
Yeah, I appreciate that, but it didn't say strictly Clark County in the bill. Maybe I misunderstood and looked, but I didn't see that.
Assemblyman Ellison, just for a point of clarification, I think Mr. Walker addressed this by referencing back to the and I can't recall the section, but Mr. Walker can come in. There's a population cap, and I think that's also what's helping trigger narrowing this down to specific jurisdictions. Mr. Walker, if you could reference that section again.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Matt Walker on behalf of the Southern Nevada Home Builders Association. For the record, that section that you referenced was NRS 278.02591. This is a chapter that allows for large counties to conduct a public facilities needs assessment and assess a variety of infrastructure needs driven by the development of an undeveloped area, including fire protection.
And then one other question is the building funds that's collected, does that help go to help set some of the offsets for like street lights, stoplights, this kind of things? Or because I'm not familiar with that fund. I know that they got problems and with the growth. I understand that quite well. So but could you answer that question?
Matt Walker on behalf of the Southern Nevada Home Builders Association. Thank you, Mr. Ellison, for the question. The short answer is no. Building Enterprise Fund funds can only be used for the services directly associated with providing permits, barricade permits, building permits, et cetera. Any street lights, traffic lights, et cetera, are very typically paid for by the developer as they come in and develop a parcel, and then they turn it over to the county. So that certainly is something that development pays for along the way. It just doesn't happen to be through the Building Enterprise Fund structure.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. If we could next go to Assemblywoman Brown May.
Thank you, Chair Flores. Thank you, Mr. Walker, for teaching us very much about this enterprise fund and where the monies come from. I do have a couple of clarifying questions, and first I want to thank you for meeting with me to talk this through, even long before this presentation. I just want to go back and really be clear. You're representing the Nevada Home Builders Association and the membership. Is that where this money is coming from? The home builders they're paying into this enterprise fund? That's my first question. So they're the ones that are interested in utilizing this fund to be able to develop infrastructure in the locations that they're building homes. That's sort of what I'm taking away here. And then can you talk to us about impact fees? Would impact fees be more appropriate here? Why is this the right way to go? Why is the county moving in this direction and the home builders are here? Can you explain that?
Thank you for the questions. Assemblywoman Brown May, Matt Walker on behalf of the Southern Nevada Home Builders Association, and if there's any additional clarity needed from Ms. Jacobs on behalf of the county, I'd welcome that. But generally speaking, home building industry does pay into this fund. There are several other key stakeholders in commercial development and gaming, of course, that also pay a significant amount of those building permit fees. But yes, this is essentially the development industry saying, instead of using it for this type of infrastructure, we really think it makes sense to use it for fire infrastructure. It's a unique set of circumstances where we have run into a pandemic, had the county's budget impacted by that, while also having had several large projects come through the pipeline that have created a significant amount of excess reserves. So while we've increased the impact fees for this area and indexed them to allow for further growth in the fees so that they keep up with construction inflation, we really have a unique situation where we have a one-time reserve excess and a one-time need, and we think it makes more sense to transfer these funds on a temporary basis and have that need addressed. The other option would be to further increase impact fees and allow those funds to accrue in an account and then use that for fire infrastructure funding. That's certainly what is going to happen with the remaining public facilities needs assessment dollars that were referenced in Mr. Hodgson's testimony. But we think that this is the absolute quickest and most equitable way to stand up this infrastructure, and that's why we're here before you today.
Thank you, Mr. Walker.
And thank you, Assemblywoman. Members, any additional questions, feel free to unmute yourself and state your name for the record. I don't see any on chat, but I want to make sure that I did not accidentally skip anybody. Seeing none, members, I want to thank you for the questions. We are engaged in a rather complex conversation that dates back quite a bit, and you're raising concerns that are often brought forth in this committee when we talk about sunsets and when we talk about the purpose of a fund and then potentially using it differently. So I appreciate everybody engaging in that conversation. At this time, I'd like to go to those wishing to speak in support of Assembly Bill 139. And I do believe we have Mr. Thompson, who I had previously gone to, wishing to speak in support. And I think we have him on camera, if that's correct. Is Mr. Thompson here? He may be on the phone. Oh, there he is.
Hi.
Good morning.
Hey. Steve Thompson, President of the Clark County Firefighters. For the record, I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you guys today based on this Assembly Bill 139. Clark County Fire Department is lacking resources in the southwest part of the valley, as mentioned through the presentations today. In the past, myself and the previous fire chief, Greg Castle, did spend some time with all the commissioners and identified a need in the southwest area for additional stations, including up to 7 stations to make the coverages as Mr. Inglesby had mentioned earlier. The time and the response area has grown so much in that region with the amount of growth that we need to get some new stations in that area. Our resources are limited. Our ability to build new stations is limited based on the current pandemic. After our presentation about a year ago with Greg Castle, the previous fire chief, all the commissioners did agree that we needed some stations. They put on the table 4 more stations in that exact area, the southwest. We asked for 7. We need more than that. We have 2 coming online this year, and the other 2 are in question based on the lack of funding through the general fund based on this pandemic that we're experiencing right now. If there's anything that we can do to help, please let us know. We are 100% in support of this. We need resources in the southwest part of the valley. I appreciate your time today, Mr. Chairman.
And thank you, sir. If next we could go to Ms. Jacob, wishing to speak in support. I know that we brought you on to start answering questions, but the original intent was to hopefully get your testimony in support. So we'll go to you next.
Thank you for the indulgence, Mr. Chair. Joanna Jacob, Clark County Government Affairs Manager, and we are testifying in support today of AB 139. I wanted to put some timelines on the record, I guess, on construction, as the gentlemen who have testified on this have spoken to. We are in support because this does fund a critical need for our community, for the fire stations. And Mr. Thompson noted our general fund challenges. We were just here before you earlier this week talking about the challenges that we have faced with the county budgets. I do want to clarify just one piece of testimony, Mr. Chair. Also, even though Mr. Walker noted that the city of Henderson had supplemented with general fund revenues, that it's not necessarily a decision that Clark County may make. Really, that is not the purpose of an enterprise fund, is to be self-supporting so that we cannot take those funds for general fund purposes. That's a decision for the Clark County. We do have a different enterprise fund to Mr. Ellison. Our airport is also organized as an enterprise fund. So just 2 points of clarification. I heard from Mr. Walker, there were some questions about timeline to construction on these fire stations. As Mr. Thompson noted, we do have some on the books. The point is net new stations. And so we're hoping that with the timelines negotiated in the bill, thank you to Mr. Walker and to Assemblyman Yeager for accepting the amendment, because that gives us a little bit more flexibility. The average timeline for construction of a new fire station from design through construction is about 3 years for Clark County. So as soon as these funds can be audited, they are subject to audit. And that's why we asked for the change to June 30th of next year, so that we can know exactly what funding can be transferred. And then we can have certainty. Once those funds are then appropriated by our board, we can begin design. That should take about a year. And we're hoping that we will be able to get a new station constructed within the time frame presented in this bill. So that is why we are in support. And thank you for bringing me on. I'm happy to provide clarification to any committee member also after this meeting. Thank you.
And thank you. I am just now checking that we don't have anybody else on video wishing to testify in support. My understanding is we do not have anybody else on video wishing to testify in support. At this time, broadcast, if we could go to those on the phone line wishing to testify in support of Assembly Bill 139.
To testify in support of Assembly Bill 139, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers in support at this time.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to invite those wishing to testify in opposition to Assembly Bill 139. If we could please go to the phone lines.
To testify in opposition to Assembly Bill 139, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers in opposition at this time.
Thank you. And at this time, I'd like to invite those wishing to speak in the neutral position to Assembly Bill 139.
To testify in neutral on Assembly Bill 139, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers in neutral at this time.
Thank you. Assemblyman Yeager, if you'd like to come back and any closing remarks you may have.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Steve Yeager for the record. I just want to thank the committee for hearing the bill today. I thought they were very good questions that were asked, and really want to thank those who are on the Zoom with me. They really did the hard work of talking to people in the interim, finding this solution, and I feel fortunate that they came to me and asked me to carry this bill. So certainly willing to keep working on anything that you might see needs fixing, Mr. Chair, and just hopeful that we can get a couple of fire stations built, particularly in the Southwest, to make sure that response times are adequate to protect public safety and health of the residents of that part of town. So thank you so much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you again. Please, yes.
Yeah, could I ask Mr. Yeager a question?
Assemblyman Ellison, yes, please.
Mr. Yeager, thank you. And I think it's important that we look at the districts and the needs for each district. And that's why I asked what bill that was. So I really appreciate that, because if we can address each district on some of their common things that they need help on, I think that is supportive for the people in that district, because I know that the whole state's different. And that's why, you don't go by pop caps anymore, but we can go by problems we have. So thank you very much. So.
Thank you for your kind words, Assemblyman Ellison.
And thank you again. And thank you all who co-presented. The information was very useful, and appreciate you coming ready. With that, we're going to go ahead and close out the hearing on Assembly Bill 139. And next, I'd like to invite those wishing to speak in public comment. Broadcast, if you could please go to the phone lines.
To take your place in the public comment queue, please press star 9 now. Chair, the public line is open and working. There are no callers at this time.
Great, thank you. Just some quick cleanup, members. I want to remind you that when we are meeting, although we are doing it virtually, that we respect the quorum and that we treat the virtual meeting as if we were sitting at the dais. And anything that we wouldn't do at the dais, that we refrain from doing on camera, for both for the respect and to ensure that we're focusing our entire attention to the presenters. But on top of that, I also wanted to make sure that we're sending a very clear message that we take this very serious. So please, anytime we are on once the meeting starts, you are sitting at the committee meeting, we are sitting at the dais, and I expect us to continue to respect that. And for our broadcast team, thank you today. I know we had a bunch of technical issues. That's normal. We expect that, and I appreciate you working through that. I will ask that moving forward, and I say this publicly, and I want to make sure that it's on the record so that nobody ever takes any offense to this. But if a broadcast, if at any time you ever see that a presenter is having issues with their sound, although it is the preference of the committee to have them appear through the virtual Zoom meeting, if we're having that sound issue, I ask that you disallow them from doing the actual virtual Zoom, and that you ask that they do the phone. And again, I'm saying that publicly so that nobody takes offense if broadcast ever does that, but it is to your benefit that the members can hear your responses. So moving forward, it will be the standard of this committee that if we're having issues with audio, that we're going to ask that you call in instead of joining us virtually. And again, It's to your benefit that we do that, to ensure that you can both hear us clearly and we can hear you moving forward. With that, members, again, thank you for the thoughtful discussion today. I really appreciate everybody engaging. I look forward to working with everybody on these two bills. And with that, this meeting's adjourned.